Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we have another very cool Mattel figure to take a look at, another Dino Trackers figure, and yet another Strike Attack figure, as we've got the brand new version of the Genyodectes, and I actually really like the paint scheme of this one. I would have really liked to have seen a little more paint leading out into the yellowish area on the tail, as far as like that brownish tone meshing with the yellow. I think it would have looked really cool if it had gone the entire way, but even still, it actually looks really neat as far as the design and coloration they've come up with for this one. And this is the first time we've had this species that wasn't the extreme damage version. This is our second Genyodectes overall. But again, the first time we haven't had the, extreme damage area here on the side. So that's a plus for this one. And definitely nice to have two different versions. Now we just need a different version of the Quilmosaurus because I love that figure. But as far as the packaging goes, you can see it's pretty much your standard. We have a nice kind of wooded area here for the backdrop for the, again, the habitat of the Genyodectes. And then here on the back, you can see that we have a sneak peek of the figure, as well as, again, the listing here for the others that are in this wave. And at this point, the only one we have left to review from this wave is the Zuniceratops. So let's pop this out of the box and check it out. So here is our brand new version of the Genyodectes, and it looks pretty nice. Again, the coloration looks really cool, I think. The one thing, though, that I'm kind of shocked by is that we don't have neck articulation, like, at all. No neck articulation at all. I don't know if it's because of the action feature. Maybe they couldn't pull off this action feature with some neck articulation. I'm not too sure what the reasoning is for the lack of neck articulation, but we had it on the extreme damage version. Boy, that stands kind of slanted, but we did have it for the extreme damage version. We don't have neck articulation now for this version. Regardless, it does still look really cool, and I was a huge fan of the initial Genyodectes, so pretty psyched to have another version of it here. So let's jump straight to a closer look at this right now. So looking at the figure overall, it does almost appear to be the same sculpt as the last one. Of course, again, missing the extreme damage area, but there are some very slight differences between the two. So let's bring the original up here. So straight away, I would say the majority of the figure looks pretty much the same. If we actually close the mouth, you can see that the head sculpt, the lower jaw, everything looks pretty much the same here on the newer version compared to the older one. Of course, as we move down into the neck, you can see that the older one did sport some neck articulation. The newer one absolutely does not. The arms look the same to me. I don't notice any major differences, except it almost appears as though the connection area here is a bit larger than what we see on the older one. You can see it does look a little thicker as far as the upper part of the arm goes. Again, as you lead back into the stomach region, you can see that we don't have extreme damage on the newer one. We did have it on the older one. The legs are positioned the same. The sculpting of the legs appears to be the same to me. I don't notice any differences there. As you look up here on the back of the dinosaur, we again have that kind of osteoderm-like appearance running down the course of the figure. The buttons for the action features are slightly different. I don't know why. They probably could have just used the same button that they had for the older one, because again, it's a push-down button. But you can see it's a little bit longer on the newer one compared to the older one. And on top of that, they actually flip-flopped the Jurassic World Facts app, because you could see it was kind of facing the other way previously. The one thing that I think is a bit different is the tail. The tail looks different to me. Now, maybe not to you at first glance, kind of looks like it's the same. There's definitely a stronger curve in the tail to the newer one, and a downward curve compared to the older one. The older one didn't curve down near as much as the newer one does. The newer one definitely has a much stronger curve, and maybe slightly curved more overall. You can see, again, just a slight bit more curved, I think, than the older one. So there are definitely some differences, but nothing that is so major that I feel like we really need to examine the sculpt any more so than what we already have. You definitely could take notice to a good bit of difference, but at the same time, the majority of the figure looks very similar overall. So we're just going to basically focus on anything that's different outside of the sculpt. And of course, that would be primarily the coloration. So we have kind of like almost like a mustard yellowish type of a tone for the face here. And you can also see that we actually have not only like a speckling, but kind of like a splotchiness to the coloration. Again, like we've had on a lot of the newer Mattel figures, kind of like a brown sort of splotching here through the face that's kind of like embedded in the material the figure is made with. Something that you, again, could say for the speckling that you always see, but they've just changed it from more of like a speckling to kind of like a more sizable appearance to that, alternate coloration. But you can see that as we move through the face, there's this darker brown leading up. It is glossy in the face, which is interesting. Again, Mattel loves to do that. And in this case, I actually think it looks okay on the figure. I don't think the glossiness takes away from the figure at all. We also have a yellow eye with a pupil that I think is black, but it could also be the same dark brown that we have there. And it is nicely placed, unlike my recent Herrerasaurus. You can also see that we have that dark brown for the lower jaw as well. And the eye also looks pretty decent over here, which is definitely a big plus for this figure. The teeth are all sculpted fairly nicely. Again, big and bulky like they usually are, but considering it's a toy, it's understandable. You can also see that we have a darker tone of like a pinkish or a reddish tone in the inside of the mouth for the tongue, as well as those skin flaps on the side of the mouth. It's also given a nice gloss coat, and the teeth are painted with kind of like an off-white, which helps to add a little element of realism, as well as, again, a little bit of a gloss coat on the teeth so that they shine fairly realistically as well. As you start to lead back into the body, you see the brown primarily take over the majority of the body, and it goes from being glossy to, again, now more of a matte finish. And you can also see how the brown kind of stripes down and the yellow kind of stripes up, and I really do like that. I think it looks really neat, and I also like that the brown kind of runs down here into the throat. In fact, I think the entire figure would have looked super cool if they had continued this dark brown down along the underside and just allowed this kind of yellowish tone to sort of like design back and forth, stripe back and forth. It would have looked really neat. But as you move down, you continue to see that dark brown. Again, it overtakes the entire arms. The arms are nothing more than that brownish tone. As you get back here, the legs as well are that brownish tone. And again, you can see no nail paint. Kind of almost sort of looks like there's a slight gloss coat, but not really to the nails. But as you lead back here, you can see that the brown starts to taper off, and then we have nothing left but that kind of like mustard yellowish type of a color for the rest of the body. You can see again that that speckling is present there as you move through. Not super abundant, but it is there. The coloration to the underside, you can definitely see the speckling down here, but the coloration to the underside is again that same tone as you move through as well. It would have been cool to see that brown, that darker brown, run here through the entire course of the tail. I definitely think it would have looked better, but even still, I think the coloration that they've given it still looks pretty nice, and yet again, it's another really fun-looking version of the Genyodectes from Mattel, so that's 2 for 2 as far as these guys go. I definitely like both of them as far as the paint schemes. I think I prefer the other one a little bit, but this one still is also quite nice. As far as articulation goes, again, the articulated jaw, but the mouth is always open because it's part of the action feature. As you move back, you have articulation in the arms, also out away from the body. Unfortunately, no neck articulation again. That is definitely a bummer for this one. You also have leg articulation forward and back. You can definitely go back pretty far. And yeah, it moves out a little bit, but not very much. And then you also have a swivel tail, which again is pretty much the most useless part of the articulation. And then for the action feature, you've got a jaw snapping action feature, which is pretty much what you would expect for this type of dinosaur. Definitely better than the Herrerasaurus action feature. I don't like that it kind of like stands at a weird slant. Let's turn it and see what it looks like from over here. It looks better from over here. From the other side, it just looks like it's leaning more. I don't know why. But as far as a size goes, it's going to fall right in a similar size to the previously released version, about 7.5 inches or around 19 centimeters for length, and then height-wise, you're looking at right around 3.25 inches, maybe slightly over, or a little bit over 8 centimeters, approaching 8.5. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Dilophosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line, next to our newest version, the Strike Attack version of the Genyodectes, and you can definitely see, again, it sports exactly the same size pretty much as the previous version. So, at this point, with how many of these I've been seeing in stores, hopefully you will have had a chance to view this figure in store, but if not, for another comparison, there is a Mattel Velociraptor and Dilophosaurus, who are two very common entries carries into the size comparisons these days on my channel, because they are very popular figures from Mattel, so I always feel like they're good ones to bring in for a size, especially the Raptors, because we've had so many Raptors. And you can see again that the Genyodectes is pretty much right there in the same size range as these two right here. And there are the two versions of the Genyodectes next to each other. We have the extreme damage version and the strike attack version. Definitely cool to have two figures of this species already. I think I actually had seen the newer strike attack version unveiled before I ever was able to actually get a hold of the extreme damage version. I remember that being pretty humorous because there's already a second version that was announced before I ever even found the first version. But regardless, again, two very cool figures, two really neat figures to enter my collection, and being a Genyodectes, it in general is quite awesome. Now, not only to have one, but to have two. So this brand new Mattel Jurassic World Dino Trackers strike attack version of the Genyodectes is really quite nice, but not quite as nice, I think, as the older one. I just like the older coloration a bit more. But even with that being said, the new coloration is really cool. It could have been improved a little bit by just having the brown run further out onto the tail, and even having the brown run along the underside. It really could have made it quite striking overall, but even without that aspect of the figure, it still looks really nice, and even though they haven't used very many tones of color, they've found a way to only use the few tones of color that they've chosen for it in a really neat, natural way, where it doesn't look bad by any means. I think it overall looks really quite nice as far as the paint scheme goes. And also the tones of color they've used also look really good. The sculpt, of course, is beautiful. It was beautiful the first time around, and it's beautiful this time around. There are some slight modifications to this one over the older one, which we went over earlier, but nothing that's major overall. It still does look cool to have some slight modifications, just because it kind of gives it a little bit of difference from the other one, and then when you have two of the Genyodectes, it at least looks like it's not the exact same figure with a different paint job. There again is a little bit of difference, which is a plus, I think, for this one. You also have some pretty fun articulation, nothing major, and in fact a little less articulation than you normally have for Mattel, because we are lacking neck articulation on this, which in my opinion is probably the biggest downside to the figure as a whole, is the lack of neck articulation. But it still, again, doesn't look terrible because of the articulation missing in the neck region. It would have helped to add, a little element of posability to our figure, but it still looks pretty nice as a whole, and the neck articulation I don't think takes too much away from the figure. The action feature is okay as well, definitely better than, I would say, any of the action features on these Strike Attack figures that we've seen this far into the reviews. It's probably the best one, but it's also like the most, generic one. It's like the exactly what you would expect, jaw snapping articulation, but being a predator, that works perfectly. So as a whole, it's another really neat figure, and just like I've said the last few Strike Attack reviews, I'm going to include a link in the description to Big Bad Toy Store, where you can go ahead and place an order for these when they are in stock. They kind of go in and out of stock, so hopefully you'll be able to catch it when they are in stock, and if you don't, then hopefully they'll restock them in general soon, and that won't be an issue, because again, definitely a really cool wave of these Strike Attack figures that I recommend picking up. So make sure you check the link in the description, go place an order if they are in stock, and like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.